The PS2 delivered some of the most iconic games ever made. In this ranking, I'm placing the top PS2 games I've personally played into different tiers based on how well they hold up, how fun they still are, and how memorable the overall experience feels now. Let's get straight into the list. Resident Evil 4 completely changed how I looked at survival horror games. The over-the-shoulder camera made every fight feel intense, and the aggressive enemy AI forced me to react quickly, instead of slowly walking through dark corridors. The village opening remains one of the most chaotic introductions I've played, especially once the chainsaw enemy starts hunting you through the crowd. I liked how the campaign kept introducing new locations, smarter combat situations, and different weapons without losing momentum. The upgrade system also gave every treasure and fight a purpose. Escort sections could become stressful, but they added extra pressure during large battles and made survival harder in a good way. The massive boss encounters and cinematic moments kept surprising me right until the ending. This one easily earns its place in the excellent tier on my ranking. Amplitude was a really creative rhythm game at a time when most music titles were starting to become repetitive. I liked how every song was split into separate tracks, letting me rebuild the music piece by piece while moving across the stage at high speed. The gameplay became surprisingly intense once the harder difficulties started demanding faster reactions and cleaner timing. Some track layouts could get frustrating because maintaining long combos was not always fully in your control, but the challenge still kept me focused through most songs. The soundtrack also helped a lot since it mixed several genres instead of relying on a single style. I never cared much about the character customization or remix tools, though the core gameplay stayed addictive enough to carry the experience. This one settles nicely into the good tier on my list. Tekken Tag Tournament kept me playing for hours because the combat felt smooth, fast, and satisfying. I spent a lot of time experimenting with different character combinations since the tag system added real strategy during matches. Swapping fighters at the right moment could completely change the momentum of a battle, especially during tougher fights. The massive roster also gave me plenty of reasons to keep returning because nearly every fighter had a different style and personality. I also liked how varied the stages looked, from busy city locations to snowy outdoor arenas filled with detail. Even the bowling mode became surprisingly addictive with friends and added extra replay value outside the normal battles. The weak ending scenes were disappointing, but the gameplay stayed consistently fun the entire time. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Shadow of the Colossus completely changed once I gave it another chance. At first I struggled with the empty world, awkward controls, and confusing boss encounters, but the deeper I went, the more everything started to click. I liked how every Colossus became its own puzzle instead of a normal fight, forcing me to study movement patterns and figure out how to climb each massive creature. The atmosphere also carried the experience with its emotional music, lonely landscapes, and quiet storytelling. Some camera problems and clunky movement still became frustrating, especially during difficult climbing sections, but the scale of the battles kept me pushing forward. Reaching the top of a Colossus for the first time always felt rewarding because every victory looked spectacular. This one finds its place in the good tier on the ranking. Dark Cloud II offered so many different activities that I rarely felt stuck doing the same thing for too long. I spent a lot of time rebuilding towns, upgrading weapons, taking photos for inventions, and exploring dungeons without getting bored. The world-building mechanics made progression satisfying because every area slowly changed based on my decisions. I also liked switching between the main characters since both had unique weapons and abilities that helped combat stay fresh. The randomized dungeons could sometimes become repetitive, and the fighting never reached the same smooth level as the best action RPGs, but there was always another activity waiting around the corner. The colorful visuals, strong music, and relaxing atmosphere also helped the journey stay memorable from beginning to end. This one easily reaches the great tier on my ranking. Guitar Hero 2 turned simple button presses into something that actually made me feel like I was performing on stage. The songs were much harder this time, especially on higher difficulties where fast solos and difficult chord changes started destroying my fingers. I also liked how the soundtrack covered different styles of rock instead of repeating the same sound again and again. Practice mode became extremely useful because some songs demanded real patience before I could finally clear them properly. Playing co-op with friends also made sessions far more chaotic and entertaining, especially when both players were trying to activate star power together. The visuals were never the main attraction, but the energetic stages and flashy presentation matched the music really well. This one easily lands in the good tier on my ranking. Persona 4 started like a simple small-town mystery, but slowly turned into one of the most memorable RPG experiences I've played. I liked how the story mixed murder investigations, supernatural dungeon crawling, and quiet daily life without making any part feel out of place. Building social links with different characters made the world feel alive, and the group chemistry stayed entertaining through the entire journey. The dungeon themes were also creative because each one reflected the personality and struggles of the victim connected to it. Some grinding and repeated battle music became tiring after long sessions, but the combat system and persona abilities still kept battles engaging. By the time the final hours arrived, I was completely attached to the cast and the town itself. This one easily belongs in the masterpiece tier. Rayman 2 Revolution became a memorable platforming adventure because the world mixed colorful cartoon visuals with a strange, darker atmosphere. I liked how each area introduced new set pieces and movement sections, instead of repeating the same ideas for too long. The robot pirate enemies also stood out since they gave the adventure a stronger identity than many platformers from that era. Some mechanics could feel awkward at times, especially the slow helicopter glide and a few confusing hub sections, but exploring the environment still stayed enjoyable throughout the journey. The upgraded visuals and added content also helped this version feel more complete compared to other releases. Even years later, the atmosphere and music remain the parts I remember most clearly after finishing it. This one earns a spot in the great tier on my ranking. Onimusha 3 Demon Siege mixed samurai action and cinematic storytelling in a way that made the entire adventure feel larger than most action games from that time. I liked how the story constantly switched between different timelines, while introducing strange situations that became unintentionally funny at points. The combat stayed satisfying because landing critical attacks and fighting massive demon enemies never got old. I also appreciated how the controls felt smoother compared to older entries since movement no longer felt stiff during fights. Exploring Paris alongside traditional Japanese locations gave the game a unique atmosphere that helped it stand apart from similar hack-and-slash titles. Some puzzles slowed the pacing more than I wanted, but the boss fights and presentation easily carried the experience forward. This one easily earns its place in the excellent tier on my ranking. Ratchet and Clank up your arsenal balanced platforming, shooting, and humor so well that I rarely wanted to stop progressing to the next planet. I liked how the game constantly introduced new weapons, gadgets, and side activities without slowing down the pacing. The combat also became much more exciting once the stronger weapons started leveling up and turning into complete chaos during larger battles. Some sections focused heavily on action compared to earlier entries, but the variety helped prevent the adventure from becoming repetitive. I also enjoyed the smaller gameplay changes like Clank missions, arena fights, and the funny disguise sequences that broke up the normal exploration. The colorful worlds, energetic soundtrack, and entertaining characters made the entire journey consistently fun from beginning to end. This one easily earns a place in the excellent tier on my ranking. Call of Duty Finest Hour showed me how different older military shooters felt before the series became smoother and more cinematic. The campaign could be brutally difficult at times, but that difficulty also made certain battles feel far more desperate and intense. I especially liked the Russian missions because they captured the chaos of war better than many later entries in the franchise. Tank sections and defensive missions also helped break up the pacing and created some genuinely memorable moments. The controls and gunplay definitely felt clunky compared to modern shooters, and the terrible checkpoints could become frustrating after long missions. AI teammates were also more annoying than useful during many fights. Even with those problems, the atmosphere, music, and large-scale battles still made the campaign worth pushing through. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time blended platforming puzzles and action together in a way that still feels unique years later. I liked how movement stayed smooth and precise because every wall run, swing, and jump flowed naturally into the next action. The time rewind mechanic also made difficult sections far less frustrating since mistakes never felt overly punishing. Combat seemed simple at first, but once I learned how to combine acrobatics with sword attacks, the battles became much more satisfying. The palace itself constantly looked impressive with its huge-scale, detailed environments and strong atmosphere. I also enjoyed the relationship between the two main characters because their conversations helped the journey feel more personal during quieter moments. The adventure may be short, but nearly every moment stays memorable. This one belongs in the masterpiece tier. Love Katamari turned something as simple as rolling a sticky ball into one of the strangest and most entertaining experiences I played on the system. I liked how every stage constantly became more chaotic, as tiny objects slowly turned into cars, buildings, and eventually entire landscapes getting absorbed into the Katamari. The controls felt unusual at first, but once I adjusted to them, the movement became surprisingly satisfying. I also enjoyed how creative the missions became, since some levels completely changed the normal gameplay with racing fire mechanics or other bizarre ideas. The weird humor and colorful presentation gave the adventure a personality that almost nothing else could match. The camera occasionally became frustrating in tighter spaces, but the incredible soundtrack and addictive gameplay easily made up for it. This one deserves its place in the excellent tier. SoulCalibur II featured some of the smoothest and most satisfying weapon-based combat I experienced in a fighting game. I liked how every character had a completely different fighting style because the weapons changed the pacing range and strategy of every battle. Fast fighters could overwhelm opponents quickly, while heavier characters demanded slower, more careful attacks. The movement system also made fights feel far more dynamic since circling around attacks created constant openings during matches. I spent a lot of time experimenting with different characters because the roster stayed varied and entertaining throughout. The visuals also held up surprisingly well with detailed stages, flashy weapon clashes, and strong animations during combat. Some guest characters felt slightly out of place, but the gameplay quality easily carried the entire experience. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Bully explored school life in a way that still feels unique because almost every activity tied directly into the setting and its different student groups. I liked exploring the smaller map since every area became easy to recognize without constantly checking directions. The classes were also surprisingly entertaining because they broke up the normal missions with different minigames and rewards. Characters from each clique had distinct personalities, which helped the story stay memorable from beginning to end. The soundtrack and voice acting also added a lot to the atmosphere and made Bulworth feel believable despite the exaggerated humor. The controls definitely felt awkward at times, especially during fights and movement, but I still enjoyed spending time in the world because there really is nothing else quite like it. This one belongs in the great tier. Red Faction used destruction mechanics in a way that still felt impressive long after I finished the campaign. I liked how blasting holes through walls and creating shortcuts made firefights more creative than most shooters from that time. The campaign also stayed entertaining because the locations constantly changed from mining tunnels to laboratories and large outdoor sections on Mars. Some weapons felt standard compared to other shooters, but the railgun easily became my favorite because of how ridiculous and powerful it was during combat. The controls in multiplayer definitely showed their age in certain moments, especially when the frame rate started struggling during heavier action. Even with those issues, the atmosphere, strong level variety, and geomod system made the experience stand out from many other shooters released during that era. This one lands in the good tier. Psychonauts became memorable because every level felt completely different depending on whose mind I was exploring. I liked how the game balanced strange humor, emotional stories, and creative world design without losing its personality. Some levels became genuinely funny, while others revealed surprisingly dark backstories that made the characters far more interesting. The platforming and combat were fairly simple most of the time, but the imagination behind each environment kept the adventure consistently interesting. I also enjoyed how the game turned psychological ideas into actual enemies, puzzles, and visual themes instead of only explaining them through dialogue. Certain sections could become tedious because of repeated tasks and slower pacing, but the writing and atmosphere always kept me interested in seeing what came next. This one belongs in the great tier. Devil May Cry 3: Dante's Awakening became one of the toughest action games I played because the combat demanded fast reactions and smart timing during every major fight. I died constantly during boss battles, but the challenge always made me want another attempt instead of giving up. The combat styles also added a lot of depth since each one completely changed how I approached enemies in difficult encounters. I especially liked how smooth the controls felt because every dodge, combo, and attack responded instantly during chaotic fights. Dante could be overly cheesy in some cutscenes, but the ridiculous action and flashy weapon animations still made him entertaining to watch. The visuals and repeated music tracks showed some limitations, yet the gameplay easily carried the entire experience. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Kingdom Hearts 2 combined fast action combat and Disney worlds in a way that stayed entertaining through almost the entire adventure. I liked how flashy the battles became once drive, forms, summons, and reaction commands started unlocking later in the game. The combat looked chaotic at times, but the controls stayed simple enough that everything remained easy to follow during larger fights. Visiting different worlds also kept the pacing varied since every location introduced different characters, enemies, and mini-games. Some story sections dragged on too long, especially during the opening hours, and a few worlds felt smaller than I expected. Even with those problems, the music, visuals, and emotional character moments carried the experience extremely well. Watching Disney and Final Fantasy characters interact still felt strange in the best possible way. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Tekken 5 brought back everything I wanted from the series after the slower direction of the previous game. The combat felt fast, responsive, and satisfying because every punch, kick, and combo connected smoothly during matches. I spent a lot of time trying different fighters since the roster stayed varied and nearly every character had a unique fighting style worth learning. The stages also looked impressive, with interactive environments, detailed effects, and stronger visuals compared to earlier entries. I especially liked the soundtrack, because the energetic music matched the fast pace of the battles perfectly. The extra content added plenty to do outside normal fights, especially the classic arcade games and character customization options. The gameplay still feels polished and addictive whenever I return to it. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Klonoa 2: Lunatea's Veil stayed enjoyable because the platforming remained simple, fun, and easy to follow without becoming frustrating. I liked the colorful visual style since the cel-shaded graphics still looked charming and expressive during nearly every level. The ring mechanics also added some variety because enemies could be used for extra jumps, attacks, and small puzzle sections throughout the adventure. Some levels felt very familiar compared to other platformers from that era, but the smooth controls helped everything stay satisfying to play. The surfing stages easily became my favorite parts because they added faster-paced sections that broke up the normal platforming. The story tried a little too hard to become emotional at times, and the short length made the adventure end quickly. This one lands in the good tier. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance offered simple hack and slash combat that made dungeon exploration easy to jump into for long sessions. I liked collecting stronger weapons, armor, and abilities while slowly fighting through caves, towers, and underground areas filled with enemies. The visuals also looked impressive for the time, especially the lighting water effects and detailed environments during certain levels. Combat eventually became repetitive since many encounters played out almost the same way, and the enemy AI could act incredibly dumb during fights. Some platforming sections also felt awkward and unnecessary compared to the rest of the gameplay. The progression system and satisfying loot grind still made the adventure difficult to stop playing once I got invested. This one belongs in the great tier. Burnout 3 Takedown turned every race into complete chaos because driving aggressively was the entire point instead of something the game punished. I liked how boosting only worked when I took risks, since it forced me into dangerous situations at insane speeds almost constantly. The crashes also looked spectacular, with slow-motion takedowns, giant pileups, and cars flying across the road in every direction. Road Rage became one of my favorite modes because smashing opponents into traffic never stopped being satisfying. Crash mode was equally addictive since causing the biggest possible chain reaction felt ridiculous in the best way. The soundtrack could become annoying after a while, but the speed sense of impact and non-stop intensity carried the experience easily. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Half-Life balanced action, horror, and exploration in a way that made the adventure feel very natural for its time. I liked how the story unfolded while moving through the Black Mesa facility instead of constantly stopping for long cutscenes. The alien creatures and military enemies also helped keep the pacing unpredictable because every section introduced different dangers and situations. Some puzzle sections became confusing when I was unsure where to go next, but the smooth controls and satisfying gunplay kept me moving forward. I also enjoyed how the atmosphere slowly changed from scientific disaster to complete chaos as the journey continued. The extra co-op content on this version was interesting too, even if parts of it became frustrating alone. This one belongs in the great tier. Guilty Gear X2 featured some of the fastest and most chaotic fighting game combat I experienced during that era. I liked how every character felt completely different because the roster was filled with bizarre designs, strange weapons, and unique fighting styles. Learning mechanics like Roman cancels and burst attacks also made the combat deeper than I expected at first. Matches constantly rewarded aggressive play, which kept every fight intense and unpredictable. The anime-style visuals still looked fantastic, especially during flashy special attacks and dramatic character animations. I also enjoyed the heavy rock soundtrack because it matched the energy of the battles perfectly. Some mechanics could feel overwhelming for newcomers, but spending time learning them became extremely rewarding. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec made realistic racing feel rewarding because every car handled differently and demanded proper control during tougher races. I liked slowly earning money, upgrading vehicles, and unlocking stronger cars instead of having everything available immediately. The driving mechanics also felt satisfying since braking, acceleration, and cornering all required careful timing rather than reckless speed. Some tracks became repetitive after replaying them many times for extra credits, but the progression system always gave me another reason to continue racing. The visuals looked impressive for the time, especially the detailed car models and smoother lighting during races. Multiplayer felt limited because only 2 players could race together, yet the massive amount of cars, events, and upgrades easily carried the experience. This one belongs in the great tier. TimeSplitters 2 offered an insane amount of content for a shooter and rarely felt repetitive because there was always another mode challenge or mission waiting to try. I liked how the campaign constantly changed settings and objectives instead of repeating the same firefights over and over. Some missions became frustrating because enemies absorbed too much damage and checkpoints were limited, but the fast pacing kept the action exciting. Arcade mode easily became my favorite part because the huge amount of customization made matches feel unpredictable every time. Playing split screen with friends was also chaotic in the best possible way, especially with the strange game modifiers and massive character roster. The aiming definitely feels awkward compared to modern shooters, yet the smooth performance, humor, and replay value still make it easy to revisit. This one belongs in the good tier. Hot Shots Golf 3. made golf far more addictive than I expected, because improving my shots and unlocking new content always gave me another reason to continue playing. I liked how the simple controls slowly revealed more depth once I started paying attention to wind terrain, ball spin, and club selection during matches. Winning tournaments and unlocking stronger golfers also made progression feel rewarding after difficult rounds. The colorful courses and relaxed presentation helped the experience stay enjoyable even when certain shots went terribly wrong. Some characters were annoying and lacked personality, especially compared to other sports games from that era, but the actual golfing mechanics carried the experience easily. Learning how to lower my scores over time became the most satisfying part of the entire game. This one belongs in the good tier. Beyond Good and Evil combined stealth exploration and storytelling in a way that made the adventure feel different from most action games released during that time. I liked investigating restricted areas and taking photographs because it added variety beyond simple combat encounters. Jade also became an easy character to care about since her interactions with the Resistance members and children gave the story more emotional weight. The world itself felt memorable with its strange mix of sci-fi cities, hovercraft travel, and conspiracy-driven missions. Combat was definitely the weakest part, because enemies became far too easy once I upgraded my health and supplies. Still, the strong voice-acting music and atmosphere carried the experience through nearly every moment of the journey. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Ace Combat 04 Shattered Skies made aerial combat feel exciting because nearly every mission turned into long, intense battles against huge groups of enemies. I liked how objectives constantly changed during missions, since many stages surprised me with new threats after I thought the job was finished. Flying through narrow ravines while avoiding enemy fire also created some of the most memorable moments in the campaign. The grading system pushed me to improve because destroying more targets and managing my time carefully always felt rewarding. Some missions could become repetitive because of their longer length, especially when flying back for ammunition refills, but the action rarely slowed down for too long. The music atmosphere and radio chatter during battles also helped every fight feel dramatic and cinematic. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix made street racing feel chaotic and addictive because every race pushed me into risky shortcuts, heavy traffic, and aggressive opponents. I liked how much freedom the game gave with vehicle customization, since nearly every car and bike could be upgraded and visually changed in ridiculous ways. The different cities also helped keep the races interesting, because learning shortcuts and hidden routes became a huge advantage during tougher events. Tokyo added more content and challenge, although parts of the city felt less unique than I expected. Some races relied too much on memorizing routes through trial and error, which occasionally became frustrating after repeated losses. Still, the fast arcade handling soundtrack and non-stop sense of speed made it difficult to stop playing once I started progressing. This one belongs in the great tier. Ico created a lonely atmosphere that made the giant castle feel mysterious and strangely peaceful at the same time. I liked how the game focused more on exploration puzzles and movement instead of non-stop combat. Solving puzzles with Yorda also made the adventure feel more personal because protecting her became just as important as escaping the castle itself. The lack of dialogue surprisingly worked well since the animations and environments explained most of the emotions without needing many words. Combat definitely felt repetitive because the shadow enemies rarely changed much throughout the journey, but the climbing, platforming, and puzzle sections carried the experience. The visuals, music, and lighting still looked beautiful for that era, especially during the quieter moments between major areas. This one belongs in the good tier. Viewtiful Joe combined stylish combat and platforming in a way that constantly made fights feel exciting and over the top. I liked using the VFX powers because slowing down time, speeding everything up, and zooming the camera changed both combat and puzzles in creative ways. The combat also rewarded skill instead of button mashing, since chaining attacks together felt incredibly satisfying once I learned the mechanics properly. The cel-shaded visuals looked fantastic, especially during chaotic battles filled with exaggerated animations and effects. Some boss fights became frustrating because of oversized arenas and long difficulty spikes, especially near the ending sections. Joe himself could also become annoying with the non-stop cheesy dialogue. The fast gameplay creativity and visual style carried the entire experience easily. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Tony Hawk's Underground changed the series in a big way because the story mode made progression feel more personal than simply chasing high scores. I liked traveling through different cities, completing strange missions, and slowly building my character from an unknown skater into a professional. The skating mechanics also felt deeper because pulling off longer combos and advanced tricks required much more precision than before. Getting off the skateboard added extra freedom during exploration, although some walking and driving sections felt awkward compared to the actual skating. The huge amount of customization also kept me invested since creating parks, tricks, and characters added plenty of replay value. The graphics and animations showed some rough edges, but the soundtrack-level variety and addictive gameplay carried the experience easily. This one belongs in the great tier. Jak II changed the series into a much darker and more action-focused adventure while still keeping the strong platforming that made the original memorable. I liked exploring Haven City because the open-world structure added more variety through missions, vehicles, and side activities. The platforming sections were easily my favorite parts, since the movement controls felt smooth and responsive during difficult jumps and climbing sequences. The addition of guns also made combat far more exciting, especially during larger enemy encounters and chaotic missions. Some objectives became frustrating because of sudden difficulty spikes and awkward driving controls during tighter races or chase sections. The story and edgy atmosphere definitely leaned hard into early 2000s attitude, but that also gave the game its own identity compared to other platformers from that era. This one belongs in the good tier. NBA Street Volume 2 made basketball feel fast, flashy, and ridiculously fun because almost every move could turn into a huge combo or highlight play. I liked chaining together crossovers, passes, dunks, and steals since building up game breakers became addictive during close matches. The gameplay also balanced offense and defense better than I expected because blocking and stealing required good timing instead of random button mashing. The Legend mode added a lot of replay value too because building my own player and unlocking new courts kept me invested for hours. The presentation had plenty of personality with energetic music, colorful courts, and legendary players from different eras of basketball. The announcer definitely became annoying after a while, but the smooth arcade gameplay easily made up for it. This one belongs in the great tier. SSX Tricky made snowboarding feel completely ridiculous in the best possible way because every race encouraged huge tricks, insane jumps, and non-stop speed. I liked how the boost system rewarded stylish play since landing bigger combos helped me stay ahead during races and show-off events. The Uber tricks were easily the highlight because watching characters pull off absurd moves in midair never stopped being entertaining. The redesigned tracks also added tons of shortcuts, rails, and alternate paths that made replaying courses worthwhile. Some collisions and landing physics could feel inconsistent during tighter sections, especially when the game decided certain surfaces were suddenly unrideable. Split screen also became chaotic because so much was happening at once. The soundtrack personality and over-the-top gameplay made the entire experience incredibly memorable. This one belongs in the good tier. Dragon Quest VIII Journey of the Cursed King delivered a huge adventure that kept me invested because the world, characters, and story all felt genuinely charming. I liked traveling with Yangus Trode and the rest of the party since their conversations and personalities made the journey far more memorable than many RPGs from that era. The turn-based combat also stayed engaging because using tension abilities and planning attacks carefully became important during difficult boss fights. The cel-shaded visuals looked beautiful and matched the lighthearted fantasy style perfectly while exploring towns, forests, and massive open fields. Some grinding was definitely required later in the game, especially before tougher battles, but the progression never felt meaningless. The music, voice acting, and relaxing atmosphere made the adventure incredibly easy to sink hours into. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Twisted Metal Black turned vehicle combat into complete destruction with massive arenas, explosive weapons, and non-stop chaos during every match. I liked how each driver had their own disturbing backstory and unique special attack because it gave the roster far more personality than I expected. The levels were also packed with secrets, shortcuts, and destructible objects, which made exploration surprisingly rewarding between battles. Multiplayer became incredibly fun once the action escalated with missiles, mines, and constant ambushes from every direction. Some controls felt awkward during tighter turns, and certain fights could become frustrating when too many enemies targeted me at once. The dark atmosphere, music, and detailed environments helped the game stand apart from other arcade racers released around that time. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution focused almost entirely on skill and timing, which made every fight feel far more intense than many other fighting games from that era. I liked how every character had a distinct fighting style, because learning new moves and strategies actually took time and practice. Winning matches felt rewarding since button mashing rarely worked against tougher opponents or experienced players. The combat also stayed balanced because blocking throws and counterattacks all mattered equally during fights. Some newcomers will probably find the learning curve frustrating since mastering even one character can take a very long time. The roster lacked flashy personalities compared to other fighters, but the smooth animations, realistic martial arts styles, and deep mechanics easily carried the experience. This one belongs in the great tier. Silent Hill 2 created an atmosphere that constantly filled me with tension because the town itself felt just as dangerous as the monsters wandering through it. I liked how the game focused more on psychological horror and disturbing imagery, instead of non-stop action or cheap jump scares. Exploring dark apartments, hospitals, and endless hallways became genuinely stressful since every strange sound made me expect something terrible nearby. The combat was fairly basic and awkward at times, but I honestly think that weakness helped the tension because I never felt powerful while fighting enemies. James also became a much more interesting character as the story slowly revealed the truth behind his past and the reason he came to Silent Hill. The symbolism, music, and oppressive atmosphere made the experience unforgettable. This one belongs in the great tier. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater turned stealth gameplay into something far more open and creative than I expected, because nearly every situation could be approached in different ways. I liked sneaking through jungles using camouflage and tracking enemies carefully, since the environments actually affected how I played. The survival mechanics also added tension, because hunting animals, treating injuries, and managing supplies made the mission feel harsher and more immersive. Boss fights were easily some of the best parts of the game, especially the long sniper duel against the end and the chaotic battle with the Fury. Certain menus became annoying because constantly changing camouflage or healing wounds slowed the pacing at times. The story characters, music, and Cold War atmosphere carried the entire adventure extremely well. This one belongs in the excellent tier. God of War II expanded everything I liked about the original by making the combat puzzles and boss fights flow together much more naturally. I liked how the game constantly switched between brutal battles, platforming, and large-scale puzzles because the pacing rarely became repetitive. The boss fights were easily the highlight since many of them felt massive, cinematic, and surprisingly creative during later sections of the adventure. Kratos also became far more entertaining because his non-stop rage and destruction made nearly every scene feel intense or ridiculous in equal measure. Some quick-time events became overused, especially during longer fights where a single mistake forced me to repeat sections again. The visual scale, soundtrack, and action sequences constantly made the journey feel huge and unforgettable. This one belongs in the masterpiece tier. Mega Man X7 struggled badly with the jump into 3D because the camera controls and level design constantly made platforming more frustrating than fun. I liked some of the ideas behind switching characters during missions, since Zero, Axel, and X all played differently enough to add some variety. Zero easily felt the best to control because his fast movement and close-range combat remained satisfying during certain sections. Unfortunately, the awkward targeting system, enemy placement, and strange camera angles made many fights unnecessarily annoying. The voice acting and story also became exhausting because the dialogue repeated itself constantly during missions. A few stages had decent ideas hidden underneath the problems, but the clunky gameplay made it difficult to enjoy them for very long. This one belongs in the mediocre tier. Rumble Racing made arcade racing feel chaotic and fun because nearly every track was filled with shortcuts, power-ups, and ridiculous hazards. I liked how aggressive the races became on harder difficulties, since the AI actually used shortcuts and weapons intelligently instead of driving in straight lines. The stunt system also added a nice layer of strategy because pulling off tricks helped build turbo boosts during races. Some vehicles quickly became useless once faster classes unlocked, which made parts of the huge car roster feel pointless after a while. The announcer also became repetitive fast, especially during longer sessions with multiple races back-to-back. The speed, sense of impact, and non-stop action kept the gameplay exciting, whether I played alone or against friends in split screen. This one belongs in the good tier. Okami combined exploration puzzles and combat with one of the most unique visual styles I played during that generation. I liked using the celestial brush because drawing attacks elements and environmental effects directly onto the screen made gameplay feel creative almost constantly. The world also stayed interesting to explore, since there were hidden secrets, side activities, and small stories scattered across nearly every area. Amaterasu became a memorable protagonist even without dialogue because the animations and reactions carried plenty of personality. Some puzzles felt too easy once I understood the brush mechanics, and Isun talked far more than necessary during important moments. The music, Japanese mythology, and beautiful art direction gave the entire adventure a distinct identity that never faded away. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Sly 2 Band of Thieves improved nearly everything from the original because the larger missions and open levels made each heist feel far more interesting. I liked switching between Sly, Bentley, and Murray since every character brought different abilities and approaches during missions. The stealth gameplay also worked really well because sneaking through rooftops, pickpocketing guards, and avoiding spotlights stayed satisfying throughout the adventure. The episode structure gave the story a fun, cartoon-style presentation, and the voice acting added plenty of personality to the entire gang. Combat definitely felt weaker than the platforming and stealth sections, because most fights became simple button mashing after a while. The cel-shaded visuals, music, and huge variety of mission types kept the experience fresh from one chapter to the next. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Final Fantasy X combined emotional storytelling, memorable characters, and strategic combat in a way that kept me invested for dozens of hours. I liked how each party member had a specific role during battles because constantly swapping characters made combat feel far more active and tactical. The sphere grid system also gave progression a satisfying sense of freedom since building stats and unlocking abilities always felt rewarding. Spira became a world I genuinely enjoyed exploring thanks to the music, visuals, and strange religious atmosphere surrounding Sin and Yevon. Some minigames became unbelievably frustrating, especially the chocobo challenges tied to ultimate weapons later in the adventure. The voice acting, story twists, and emotional ending made the journey incredibly memorable long after I finished it. This one belongs in the excellent tier. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore made every fight feel fast, aggressive, and satisfying because the combat constantly rewarded timing counters and environmental attacks. I liked how easy it was to pick up since even basic moves flowed smoothly and made matches exciting almost immediately. The stage interactions were also a huge highlight because smashing opponents through walls, windows, and different areas never stopped being entertaining. Tag battles added even more chaos since switching fighters during combos created some brutal-looking attacks. The story mode barely made sense, and most character plots felt random or unfinished, especially during later scenes. Button mashing could also become surprisingly effective against inexperienced players. The smooth controls, responsive combat, and over-the-top action still made the game incredibly fun to revisit with friends. This one belongs in the great tier. Medal of Honor Frontline started with an unforgettable Normandy landing that captured the chaos of war through massive battles, explosions, and non-stop pressure. I liked how cinematic many missions felt because the large battlefields and orchestral soundtrack gave the campaign a huge sense of scale. The weapons also sounded powerful and satisfying, which helped the firefights stay exciting during longer missions. Some levels later in the game became repetitive because many objectives boiled down to clearing areas, flipping switches, or escorting allies through scripted sequences. Enemy AI could also feel inconsistent, since soldiers sometimes survived ridiculous damage while others barely reacted to nearby combat. Even with those flaws, the atmosphere, presentation, and memorable opening mission made the experience easy to appreciate years later. This one belongs in the good tier. That's my ranking of the PS2 games I've played. A lot of these still feel incredibly fun years later, while others show their age once the gameplay or pacing starts slipping. Thanks for watching.